Persona 5 is a unique RPG set in a modern-day, if dystopian, version of Tokyo, Japan. Heroes get thrown in jail in this Tokyo dystopia. The old eat the young, and predators are allowed to openly stalk the hallways of prominent high schools. Playing as the half-hero, half-terrorist protagonist Joker, the player in Persona 5 attempts to build a revolution. Alongside Joker are a growing roster of best friends, who together masquerade as Kaito, translating roughly to gentlemen or phantom thieves. Armed with a mysterious app bestowed onto them by the shadowy presence calling itself Igor, the Kaito infiltrate mental constructs or palaces of individuals of increasing prominence. This unexplainable power that they've gained leads the Kaito inside the minds of politicians and financiers at the highest rungs of society. But in the third act, the Kaito are revealed to be pawns, part of one big masquerade. In a subversive twist, the real Igor has been impersonated by a sort of false god, while all along the master you thought you served in the name of your own rehabilitation has been in fact the ultimate antediluvian authority from which you'll have to finally rebel from and overcome. We're left with a message that countenances rebellion with a gospel of responsibility and Trickster God-like good humor. Persona 5 suggests victory will only come by rejecting, not replicating, the mindset of our opponent. As one of the game's character songs puts it, "Can't hold on, or life won't change." Now, how is any of this Orwell's 1984? It's lurid yet impoverished, a place where justice, the word justice, has been hollowed of its true meaning, and now resembles nothing so much as a casino. Addictions, vices, and escapist dead ends abound, and everywhere there is an all-consuming lust for victory and vengeance. This opening scene is in fact doubly fake. It's not only part of a mind control game aimed at Sai, but the player too. The way Persona 5 stirs the player to action involves revenge. You call what you do justice, but often it more resembles out-and-out mind control. The way this works more often than not is simply by word of mouth. Rumors and lies abound in Persona 5. Throughout the game, you're tasked with sifting through the rumors to find the truth, while achieving total love and acceptance from the crowd. In effect, inadvertently creating a totalitarian one-party state. Persona 5 is a deeply political game with much more in common with Orwell's novel than I can fit into one video alone. Persona 5 resembles the world of 1984 in that everything's opposite. Society punishes the innocent while rewarding the criminal, effectively turning the meanings for good and bad inside out. The living in both works are enslaved by the dead. What do I mean? Well, everything resembles some knockoff from yesterday, some mass production. More importantly, in both works, society runs on autopilot according to a master plan drawn up long ago. I'd argue Persona 5's 20XX near future or near past setting is actually a nod to this exact Orwellian idea that history has stopped. Passage of time is now irrelevant, and the past has become a palimpsest, to be endlessly scraped anew. To see how history has stopped, take the game's central premise and the backstory of your player character, Joker. Prior to the events of the game, you intervened to save a random woman on the street. Since the assaulter was also a big shot, he had the power to drum up false charges against you. And just like that, we're introduced to the concept of a dystopian world that's sure to look no different tomorrow than 99 years from now. It's a world where life can't change, society is debased, and societals have swapped places with criminals. All of this comes from Orwell, who writes in 1984 that if you want an image of the future, to imagine a boot smashing in a defenseless human face forever. Speaking of defacement, our first proper location in Persona 5 is, much like 1984's Chestnut Tree Cafe, the LeBlanc Cafe. Here, what's conveyed and made literal is the dominion over the living, in this case Joker and his kindly caretaker by the dead, in this case Maurice LeBlanc, author of Arsène Lupin, the iconic gentleman thief. It's as though it's LeBlanc's cafe and these two just occupy it. There's a ton of cross-language wordplay here, an important inheritance from 1984, which conveys Persona 5's innate trickster spirit, something we'll revisit by the end. As one example of Persona 5's trickster wordplay, LeBlanc Café, as a phrase, we could read as an exotic curry and coffee-like mixture of global cultures, in this case French and Spanish. LeBlanc Café could mean the white, blanc in French, and brown, café in Mexican Spanish. The white-brown. This would be, in a sense, doublethink, much like we find in 1984. Sojiro as a name, meanwhile, could be read as a mix of soji, Japanese for foundation, and zero, American English for a total blank. Zero foundation, as in zero level, in turn has its own pun-based semiotic structure. My point here is that everything in Persona 5 is some recombination of a dead name, worn-out symbol, or suggestive meaning, often childlike in its simplicity. Sakura, for example, is a fundamental Japanese symbol, to be found in any Japanese 101. The point, as in 1984, with character names like Winston Smith and Emmanuel Goldstein, is to obscure the underlying blankness, the underlying halt of history. Like one corrupt elite you'll face, the con artist Madarame, instead of new creations and events, the world of Persona 5 only has to offer us repackaged forgeries, knockoffs, and phantoms. Take our first party member, Ryuji. He styles himself as a Western alt-punk, having been deprived of any real sense of originality. He helps you sniff out the corrupt patriarchy in Shujin High School surrounding a volleyball coach named Kamoshida. Ryuji's intentions are mostly good, but he can't really distinguish between reality and an action movie. Raised on a steady diet of illusions and powerlessness, instead of seeing society as just as powerless as he is, Ryuji uses the punk and eventually pirate revenge persona to escape his grim reality. At first, this is why he hates your future second party member, An Takamaki. Ironic given his role in unmasking the patriarchal structure of the high school. His distrust of An, as well as all strangers, stems from a present inability to see that reality isn't always what it seems. The dynamic here mirrors exactly the one we find in 1984, initially, between the characters Winston Smith and Julia. By the end, Persona 5 reveals that all people in Tokyo have come to relinquish their individual consciousness in the name of convenience and a pleasant, dreamlike existence dictated to them from on high. Ryuji, like all the Phantom Thieves, including An, gets sold a fantasy of revenge as a consolation prize, ironically prolonging the deprivation of any real autonomy. It isn't until the very end that this endless cycle is exposed as the true engine powering the arrest of time. You've only been tasked with destroying the Kamoshidas of Tokyo in order to replace them. In 1984, the defining struggle uniting the society of Oceania is internal conflict. Surprise attacks and betrayals are constant, as are rumors, spies, and lies. In this way, trust evaporates from society and the masses are dazzled into distraction. What this makes invisible is the uniformity. It's out of this conformity and societal selection pressures that in 1984, a new society, a new human being, gets born. Persona 5, as did tacitly George Orwell, challenges the notion of philosopher Immanuel Kant, called the categorical imperative. To see how, we'll need to go back to the very first enemy of the game, Malak, not to mention the Malak of abstraction concept by Friedrich Nietzsche, an anti-Kantian perspectivist philosopher. In effect, Kant's categorical imperative stipulates there are certain universal duties that we all hold, totally regardless of individual concerns or consent. These could include things like honor thy father, or respect and obey authority, or participate in society. For Nietzsche, in The Antichrist, meanwhile, his iconic screed against organized Christianity, this concept of Kant, Nietzsche calls the Malak of abstraction. By doing so, Nietzsche is effectively calling Kant's imperative a false idol, a monster masquerading as a divine universal truth. Why? Because, as Persona 5 spends up to 100 hours of gameplay showing us, this categorical imperative concept of impersonal and objective duty is a doctrine of orthodoxy and unconsciousness, in the wrong hands. Trying to live according to a universal herd animal like impersonal code, Persona 5 suggests, results in societies where tyrants become crucial to the social status quo, and the multitudes go through life sleepwalking as they abandon their own minds to the much stronger, simpler, much more comforting will of the supposed collective. This collective will, this categorical imperative, in Persona 5 and 1984 doesn't emerge organically, innocently, and certainly not objectively. To the contrary, the people have been artificially selected like herd animals, resembling cows ripe for slaughter. They crave being fed from a trough, being told what to think and how to live, so long as they, the masses, are freed from all burdens of individual humanity and a full conscious will. What you're really doing throughout most of Persona 5 is building the army that will take this revolution to power, serving as that imposed will, as Persona 5's equivalent to Orwell's thought police. When you take a Madarame down, you aren't challenging the system. Like jesters don't really insult or threaten the ruler, you're not fighting the system, you're perfecting it. Throughout Persona 5, you're being honed to become the perfect version of the very villains whose minds you purify. Always, as Orwell wrote, pressing and pressing on the nerve of power. Always only making the dystopia more and more inescapable, more the ultimate prison. If there's one question to sum up both 1984 and Persona 5, it's the tagline from one of the earliest teasers for the game. You are a slave. Want emancipation? In both Persona 5 and 1984, our protagonist is visited in dreams by the exact forces that are trying to control and defeat them. This serves as a metaphor for the easy fantasy of freedom the powers that be want us all to accept in place of us actually waking up and facing reality, the thinly veiled truth of our own enslavement. This is where the Malak of abstraction comes in, that we need to defeat. For Joker and the Kaito, this Malak takes the form of the power fantasy that is phantom thievery. One important antagonist in the game is Kunikazu Okumura, CEO of Big Bang Burger and father to party member Haru. The familial struggles in Persona 5 are iterations of internal conflict and civil wars, called in 1984 the new normal. But Big Bang Burger and its implication of making all cuisine and culture before fast food irrelevant brings a game-wide motif pulled from 1984 as well as MGS-V The Phantom Pain front and center. Okumura doesn't see humans, he sees worker drones, cogs, and gears. Just as he doesn't really see food, culture, or cuisine, but merely widgets in an endless conveyor belt. Okumura's accepted this as a given, this Kantian Malak of abstraction, that dictates a good citizen and decent person is one who follows the rules and customs of their society. Ironically, as the burger demonstrates itself, some customs and traditions only grow more efficient and widespread at the expense of others. It takes what Orwell, inadvertently characterizing Kant's categorical imperative, called a gramophone mind, an unconscious conformer who will just spit out and accept whatever song you play on it like a mass-produced record player. But it isn't Okumura alone we have to blame for him being a gramophone mind. After all, everyone in our party is a gramophone mind. That's just the mental atmosphere that's been induced on society. The entire atmosphere of thought has been fouled in Persona 5, just like in 1984. And you Kaito-den are only there to make it worse. Okumura can only win the coveted total victory of corporate competition as a race to the bottom. This is just how Sai, Makoto's police officer sister, has been made to feel as if she has to accept justice is just newspeak for gambling. It comes down to the question of intellectual diet, and of course there's a pun here on the concept of the parliamentary diet, or diet, that they have in Japan, one of the final boss locations. Which messages, which malaks, are getting signal boosted repetitively enough to become stuck in the masses' collective unconscious? And more importantly, what technology has facilitated reducing multitudes down into one single collective mind? These are the underlying questions that Persona 5 never comes out and asks, but are lingering at the periphery all along. Joker, Trickster. What's the difference? Well, if you're like Okumura or Kant, well, the words mean the exact same thing, functionally. But even though both are usually used interchangeably, anthropologically and linguistically, Joker and Trickster are worlds apart, literally. Joker is more from the jesters of the Dark Ages. They're like Kaito, flashy and seemingly free-willing. They live to amuse and enrich the, well, rich, as a verbal instrument of royal pomp and power. Trickster, meanwhile, can refer to a kind of deity or entity found all but exclusively in polytheistic and non-Christian or so-called pagan societies, like the one from feudal Japan, as well as the kinds that can be found among the tribes of North America. We'll end this with a long quote by by an anthropologist on the nature of a specific trickster in Japanese culture, Inari, the fox. This passage comes from Rethinking Japan, Social Sciences, Ideology, and Thought. The fox can be ascribed to the Inari mountain due to its special relation to food. It is the fox which in Japan, as a divine trickster, has to bring the rice from heaven to earth. It is quite interesting that a trickster fox is needed to guarantee food for mankind. It carries the rice from abroad or from heaven without producing it. Thus, he is a rather questionable messenger of the goddess of rice. As her messenger, he does not stand alone. In Japan's mythology, quite a few animals appear as messengers of the gods. But none of these animals is so versatile as the trickster fox, who cheats the goddess of food by stealing rice and fooling human beings in many disguises. The trickster fox bridges many gaps in life, not only the need of food and of other commodities. It also connects and mediates between life and death, past and future, nature and culture. It reveals not only the clash of different cultures, but also of several classes. In this picture of the trickster, the Inari fox fits in perfectly. It revives dead people and keeps living human beings alive. It cheats men and gods. It laughs at the difference between the sacred and the profane, sexuality and frigidity. By doing so, it continually transgresses the boundaries set for gods, men, and animals. Thus, they can appear as salvation or as the carriers of curse and doom." End quote. In effect, in non-Christian societies, we do not find the neat division of good versus evil. Trickster demigods or entities are those which, as the name suggests, play tricks, resembling good, sometimes resembling evil. And that is precisely the kind of being that Persona 5 leaves us aspiring to be.